Hi, I'm Elise Marin, and 5 years ago, my family invited me to dinner just to erase me. It was a Sunday, one of those golden, dry California afternoons when the air smells like lemons and old pavement. I remember brushing off a leaf from my windshield, thinking nothing of it. The message had said dinner at 5. Nothing big, just us. I thought it was about my graduate thesis, or maybe my brother's new promotion. Instead, it was about me, or rather, who they thought I no longer was. There was no food, just my mother, my brother, and my sister sitting on the living room couch like a tribunal, like they'd rehearsed this. My father didn't stand when I walked in. He just said, "You're late." I smiled, half laughing. Traffic was a mess, but the silence didn't laugh with me. It sat heavy in the room, louder than any words. And then, just like that, the accusations began. I used to love Sunday dinners, the way the kitchen smelled like garlic bread and burnt cheese, the way my mom would yell for everyone to sit down while my brother snuck bites before the prayer. It wasn't perfect, but it was familiar, like the old bench swing in our backyard that creaked in a way only home could. So when my dad texted that Sunday morning saying dinner at 5, family only, I didn't think twice. I showed up. But when I walked in, something felt off. The lights were on, but the house was quiet. No clattering plates, no scent of baked pasta, just my family sitting in the living room waiting like a jury. My father didn't hug me. He didn't even stand. He just said, "You're late?" like we were starting some kind of trial. I gave a nervous laugh, traffic, hoping anyone would smile. But no one did. My mom looked down at her hands. My brother Micah leaned forward with a manila folder. My sister Zariah tilted her head like she was on stage waiting for her line. Then it started. Micah slid a printed bank statement across the coffee table, my name circled in orange ink. "You took money from mom and dad's retirement," he said flatly. I blinked. I hadn't touched their account. I didn't even have access. But before I could speak, Zariah cut in. Voice rising, "And you tried to sleep with Ethan?" My fiancé. I froze. The room blurred around me. Accusations hit like hail, sharp and fast, each one harder to believe than the last. I tried to defend myself. I tried to ask why no one had called me first, why no one had asked, "Is this true?" But they'd already decided. My mom finally spoke, eyes still fixed on her lap. "You've changed, Elise. We don't recognize you anymore." That sentence stayed with me. Not we're hurt, not we're confused, just, "We don't recognize you." It felt like being erased while still breathing. Then my dad added, "We've taken you out of the family trust, and we think it's best if you leave. Tonight, no shouting, no rage, just clean, cold dismissal." They had already packed a bag for me. I stood up numb, walked past the photos on the wall, my childhood birthdays, high school graduation, the one picture Grandma had insisted we take at the beach. All those memories suddenly foreign. On the way out, I caught my dad in the garage tossing something in the trash. It was my photo album. I asked, "Really?" He shrugged. "Didn't think you'd need it." I didn't cry. Not then. My legs carried me to the car, but inside, something cracked. Here's what I learned that night. Sometimes family doesn't break you with fists or screams. They break you with silence, with the quiet confidence that they are right, and you're no longer welcome. But here's the thing about falling that hard. You stop pretending you have to hold on. And that was the beginning of something unexpected. Because when I checked into that roadside motel later that night, trembling alone and exiled, I was carrying something they didn't know about. Someone. And that's where part 2 begins. The motel off Route 12 had flickering neon curtains that didn't quite close and an air conditioner that groaned like it had seen too much. Room 108 smelled like bleach and old carpet. The bed sagged in the middle, but that night it was the only place in the world that didn't ask me who I was or what I had done. I dropped my duffel bag by the door and sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the same jeans from dinner, still holding my keys like they meant something. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't cry. I just sat in the quiet and tried to hear myself again. And slowly under the numbness, something else stirred an ache I couldn't place low in my belly, but different from any pain I'd known. I thought back to the missed dates on my calendar. The odd nausea last week I blamed on stress, the dreams, the fatigue. Somewhere in the fog, the thought rose. What if? I found a 24-hour gas station 2 blocks down, walked under the dull glow of the street lamps, and bought a pregnancy test. The cashier didn't blink, just handed me the bag like it was breath mints and a soda. Back in the motel, I sat under the sickly yellow bathroom light and watched the lines appear too. Positive, no drama, no scream, just breath, just stillness. me and someone else now. That moment split my life in two. I wasn't just a woman who'd been pushed out of her family. I was a woman about to become one. A new family, a smaller one, but mine. I whispered to the tiny life forming inside me. They threw us out, but they don't get to write our ending. Then I did something small but brave. I opened the side pocket of my bag and pulled out the old black leather journal I hadn't touched in years. The one I used to write in during med school rotations, the one no one knew I still had. And I wrote, not a plan, not a goal, just one sentence: you were the only truth they couldn't erase. Here's what I've learned since then. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is the beginning of the truest thing about you. That night didn't mark the end of my story. It was just the first time I heard the sound of my own strength without all the noise. The next morning, I made a decision not to beg, not to explain, but to build. And as fate would have it, someone else was about to return into my life quietly, gently, and just in time. Let me tell you about Camden. The message came late, a number I hadn't saved, just 7 words: if it's true, you're not alone. I stared at the screen, heart caught somewhere between fear and relief. I hadn't told anyone, not even him. And yet, Camden knew? Or maybe he'd always known how to read me when no one else could. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year. The last time we did, it ended with a quiet, "Take care of yourself," said like a promise he wasn't sure how to keep. But the next morning, just after sunrise, there was a knock at my motel door. Not rushed, not demanding, just steady, familiar. When I opened it, there he stood. Gray t-shirt, soft eyes, tan lines on his arms from working outdoors. No flowers, no speeches, just presence. He didn't ask for explanations. He just looked at me like I wasn't broken, like I hadn't been thrown out. "Are you okay?" he asked, and for a moment I couldn't find words, so I stepped back. And he walked in. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just sat me on the edge of the bed, him by the window. There was a silence between us, but not the kind that hurts, the kind that holds. I told him I was pregnant. He didn't flinch, just reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a pen, and scribbled a word on a napkin. Together. Then he slid it across the table like a contract I never thought I'd see. I laughed, more breath than sound. "You don't know what you're signing up for," I whispered. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Maybe not, but I know what I walked away from." That's when I remembered. Camden's family had money legacy expectations that came with embossed invitations and country club brunches. They wanted him polished and obedient, but he'd walked away from all of it, and maybe that's why he could see me when others only saw a problem. He remembered things I didn't think mattered, like the pitch event in college where my brother took credit for my work. Camden had been in the back row. He saw the slide deck, he saw who built it. Sometimes we think no one notices the moments we're erased, but someone always does. And here's what I learned sitting in that motel with the man who showed up anyway. You don't always need someone to fix you. You just need someone who won't flinch when you're finally honest. Later that day, over black coffee in a cracked diner booth, he said, "I'm not asking you to go back to them. I'm asking if I can help you build something new." And something in me, something that had been locked up for years, began to loosen. Because maybe healing doesn't start with justice. Maybe it starts with being believed. And that belief, it was about to lead me back to a part of myself I hadn't touched in years. A part that lived in a lab coat behind a microscope and in the margins of a research paper no one ever credited me for. Let's talk about that next. The library downtown didn't smell like hope. It smelled like dust and overheated computers and the faint trace of floor polish from a janitor who probably stopped caring 5 years ago. But to me, it was sanctuary. While Camden worked shifts at a construction site to help us pay for prenatal vitamins and dollar store meals, I sat in the corner desk of the public library surrounded by wobbly chairs and borrowed time. And I wrote, rewrote, mapped. Not poetry, not journal entries, science. I reopened the research that had once been mine before Micah slid it into his own pitch deck and rode the applause like a wave. Hormone detection algorithms, rapid biomarkers for underserved women's clinics, data that could save lives if it ever saw the light of day. I still had the early files saved in cloud drives and printouts folded into the back of an old anatomy textbook. The dates, the models, the flawed trial logs no one else had bothered to recheck. I knew this material like my own heartbeat, and maybe that's why it still beat inside me even when everything else had gone quiet. I wasn't trying to win anything, not revenge, not glory, just restoration of what mattered, of what was mine. And every time I stayed up late coding while the baby inside me kicked gently like a reminder, I felt less like a castaway and more like a builder again. Camden never hovered. He brought me tea, a USB drive, a set of pens he'd stolen from the hotel lobby where he worked nights. And most nights he just sat nearby, reading, breathing, letting me exist. We didn't talk much about what had been taken from me. But one night, as I sketched out the name of the company I dreamed of starting, he asked gently, "Do you want your name on it this time?" I looked up and I said yes. Here's what I learned during those long days of silence and code. You don't need a cheering crowd to get started. You just need a steady enough light to see the first page again. We called it Saw Light Bio, a blend of two words saw as in witnessed and light as in something no one could cover again. And just when I thought we were ready to finally bring it into the world reminded me that it still didn't know what to do with women like me, especially ones who refused to stay erased. Let me tell you what happened at our first startup showcase. The startup showcase was held in a converted warehouse, the kind with exposed brick Edison bulbs and 20-somethings in tailored blazers sipping overpriced lattes like they'd already made it. I stood outside for a full minute before walking in, one hand resting on my belly, the other clutching a folder that held everything business plan, product prototypes, initial data trials. My story, my science, my second chance. I wore the only dress that still fit navy blue, stretched just slightly over my growing bump. I'd practiced the pitch 100 times, in the mirror, in the shower, in the car with Camden, who mouthed the words along with me by now. When my turn came, I stepped onto the small stage, adjusted the mic, and began. I didn't lead with pain. I led with purpose. Slide by slide, chart by chart, I explained how Solite Bio's early hormone detection could close gaps in prenatal care for low-income women. How our tech could give clarity to those who'd never had the privilege of options. The room was still. Then came questions. Thoughtful, technical, some skeptical, but I held my ground until the last voice spoke. An older man with salt and pepper hair and a smug kind of smile. His advisor badge gleamed under the lights. He tilted his head slightly and said, "Impressive resume. But we've had our fill of single pregnant founders trying to prove a point." I didn't flinch. Not on the outside, but inside I felt something sting deep and private like a match lit in a room already filled with gas. There wasn't laughter, just silence, which somehow hurt more. I thanked the panel, gathered my things, and walked out. Camden followed but didn't say a word. He just reached for my hand and squeezed once, no pity, just presence. Here's the thing. It's not always the loud insults that bruise. Sometimes it's the soft condescension, the kind said with a smile and a business card. The kind that reminds you that no matter how sharp your science is, your story still makes some people uncomfortable. But I didn't walk away defeated. Because deep down I remembered something from my first chemistry lab in college, that sometimes pressure isn't what breaks a compound, it's what activates it. And that activation, it came a week later, in the form of a 10-foot banner, a stolen quote, and a face I hadn't seen in months. Next up, I'll tell you what it's like to walk into a room where someone else is taking credit for your life's work again. Let's talk about Zaraya. It was supposed to be just another industry panel, another polite lineup of founders, another room of note-takers sipping sparkling water and checking their phones. Camden dropped me off a few blocks away so I could walk in alone. It wasn't for drama, it was for dignity. For reclaiming a space that once belonged only to the version of me that stayed quiet. But what I saw in the lobby stopped me cold. A banner 10 feet tall, silk-printed, perfectly lit, and centered right in the middle Zaraya's face. Chin slightly lifted, arms, crossed eyes, soft but staged. Beneath it, a bold headline, "Women Leading the Future of Health," sponsored by the Zaraya Sloan Foundation. And just below that, a quote. My quote. Lifted word for word from my thesis abstract, no citation, no context, no acknowledgement. I stood there frozen, not with rage, but with something quieter. Recognition, not of her, of myself being erased again in plain sight. There's a peculiar ache that comes with being rewritten in someone else's story. It's not always loud. Sometimes it just hums like background music you can't shut off. But this time I didn't walk out. I walked past it. Inside the panel was already in progress. Neat name tags, folded programs. Zaraya, of course, wasn't there. She rarely showed up herself. Just her image. But I did, and when they handed me the mic, I didn't open with what had been stolen. I opened with what had been built, Solite Bio, our trials, our data, our mission. And then 3 slides in, I showed a photo, a mirror, a sticky note, my belly. "You're not invisible," it said. "They just can't see what you're building yet." The room was silent. Then one of the judges leaned forward. He was young, clean-cut, curious. "Wait," he said, Sloan as in Zaraya Sloan. I paused, looked him straight in the eye, and said no. I don't have a sister. That was the moment. The chat window lit up, the tweets started flying, and somewhere I felt something inside me settle like a compass, finally clicking north. Here's the lesson I took with me that day. You don't always win by proving someone wrong. Sometimes you win by continuing to exist louder than the lie. And yet, even as the room applauded, even as Camden texted, that was a mic drop moment from the hallway. The world wasn't done trying to silence me. Because what came next wasn't applause, it was a courtroom, and my mother sitting on the other side. The courthouse smelled like dry paper and air conditioning, a kind of quiet that didn't soothe, just hung heavy. I arrived early dressed in the navy blazer my mother once said made me look too sharp for a daughter. She meant it as a warning. I wore it like armor. Camden sat 2 rows behind me. No tie, no notebook, just steady presence again. The case wasn't just about ownership. It was about identity. My research, my voice, my name being used to fund a foundation I was never invited to be part of. The lawsuit outlined it all: plagiarism, misrepresentation, grant fraud. Zariah arrived late, heels clicking like applause meant for someone else. She wore cream like innocence, sunglasses indoors like fame. When the judge asked for opening statements, my attorney Renee stood like she'd been waiting her whole career for this. Your Honor, she said, calm and firm, we bring forth not only evidence of intellectual property theft, but audio of deliberate intent to erase and replace Ms. Elise Marin from the record of her own work. There was a shift in the room, the kind of silence that listens. Zariah's team fumbled with charm, called it a family misunderstanding, blamed emotional fog and creative overlap. When I stood, I didn't shake. I didn't accuse. I handed over a USB. Inside email threads, dated lab entries, recordings I hadn't even known were captured of my mother, aunt, and Zariah talking in hushed tones outside my childhood bedroom. She's too stubborn, my mother's voice said. She'll ruin the optics. Just cut her out quietly. I didn't flinch. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it had already healed. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't erase pain, but it makes the pain undeniable. When the judge granted a temporary injunction barring Zariah from benefiting from any work tied to my research, the room didn't cheer. It just breathed. Even now, I remember what Zariah looked like searching the room for someone to stand with her. But no one moved, not even our parents. And that day, I walked out not with a gavel slam or a victory lap, but with something far rarer. Clarity. That kind of stillness only comes when you finally stop chasing understanding from people committed to misunderstanding you. Here's what I held on to: justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it sounds exactly like the truth read into the record. And that truth, it became the foundation I'd stand on as I returned. Not to the past, but to my purpose. Let me show you what it looked like to build a legacy anyway. There's no perfect time to build a company, but there's something beautifully honest about doing it, between feedings and diaper changes in a lab that smells faintly of ethanol and warmed formula. Leora and Lucienne were born just before dawn. Camden held one in each arm, whispering their names like promises. In the quiet recovery room, I stared at them, 2 tiny chests rising and falling, and thought, they are the only audience I ever needed. Solite Bio didn't pause when they arrived. It just became quieter, slower, but no less alive. We ran trials from a borrowed co-working space downtown where the Wi-Fi stuttered and the coffee machine was louder than the printers. I wore the twins in a front wrap while preparing samples. When they napped, I refined data models. At 3 a.m., Camden proofread grant applications while bouncing a sleepy Lucian on his shoulder. We didn't have funding yet, but we had clarity, a mission, and love stitched into the way we showed up even on empty sleep and borrowed time. Here's what I realized during that season: being a founder isn't about scale. It's about stubbornness, about showing up when no one claps and no one's watching. I was a mother, a scientist, a CEO, not because someone gave me permission, but because I stopped waiting for it. And when the email finally arrived, subject line, initial funding approved, I didn't scream. I printed it, slid it into my folder next to the ultrasound photos, and let the moment be quiet. Because this wasn't about revenge, it was about redemption. And proof not for them, but for me. Still, legacy has a strange way of circling back. The more Solite Bio grew, the more my past tried to crawl forward, this time, not through lawsuits or betrayal, but through a single silent envelope. Let me tell you about the photo that changed everything. It arrived on a Tuesday, a plain brown envelope, no return address, no postage. Just my name, Elise Marine, written in looping cursive, the kind taught in Catholic schools and old family kitchens. Inside, wrapped between 2 pieces of thin cardboard, was a photo. At first, I didn't understand, then I looked closer. It was that photo, the one from my 12th birthday. the one where I'd always been cropped out in the framed version my parents kept in the hallway. I used to joke that I'd only made it in by accident, just a sliver of my arm, the edge of my handmade dress. But this was the original, unedited, unashamed. There I was, off center, slightly out of step, smiling too wide and holding Grandma June's hand. Not polished, not posed, but present. On the back, written in the same cursive, was one line. This is the version that matters. Camden found it while sorting old boxes from his mother's garage. Turns out she and my Aunt Regina had kept the original quietly, like it meant something. And it did, because sometimes healing doesn't come through confrontation. Sometimes it comes through an image you thought didn't exist anymore. Proof that yes, you were there. You did belong. They just didn't see it. I framed that photo and hung it in the Solite lab right above the culture station, not for display, for remembrance. Here's what I've come to believe. You don't need everyone to remember you. You just need to remember yourself. That moment wasn't dramatic, but it was defining, like closing a door without slamming it. And as Leora tugged on my sleeve that afternoon, asking why I looked kind of smiley but not really, I hugged her tight and said, because sometimes baby life hands you a picture you didn't know you needed. And just like that legacy became less about the people who edited me out and more about the ones I was building it for. But life, like truth, isn't finished just because it feels full, because the past always knocks one more time. And this time it showed up with a red spray-painted word on my windshield and a letter from Zariah's legal team. Let's talk about that. It happened quietly, like most things that try to shake you when they no longer can. I walked out of the conference center into late afternoon light. The sun was warm, the air dry, the twins at home with Camden after their preschool art day. Everything felt still until I saw my car. Across the windshield, sprayed in red backstabber. Beneath it, taped with precision under the wiper blade, was a legal envelope. Inside, a cease and desist letter from Zariah's foundation, accusing me of defamation, threatening to sue, demanding I take down all public narratives that misrepresent the family brand. The irony almost made me laugh, but instead I reached into my work bag, pulled out a folder I'd carried for months. Inside, emails, time-stamped files, grant drafts, a photo of Grandma June's original lab notes handwritten alongside mine. Not out of spite, out of clarity. I sent them to our attorney that night, not as an attack, but as closure. Because here's what I've learned about legacy. It's not about whose name is louder, it's about whose work endures when the noise fades. Legacy isn't the banner in the lobby, it's the baby asleep on your chest while you send your final draft to print. It's the grant approval that arrives during nap time. It's the photo that proves you were always there, even when they tried to crop you out. A month later, the lawsuit was dropped. Zariah disappeared from the board of her own foundation. My parents sent a single email, no subject line. Just hope you're proud. Zariah is gone, we're alone now. No apology, no reflection, just a hollow echo from the past. I didn't reply. Because real healing isn't about being invited back into broken rooms. It's about building new ones, brighter, quieter, yours. That weekend, Camden planted 2 citrus saplings in the backyard, one for Leora, one for Lucian. The twins helped pat down the dirt cheeks smudged with soil and joy. Mommy Leora asked, holding up a tiny lemon blossom, "Is this what we're leaving behind?" I nodded. Because maybe legacy isn't a name on a plaque. Maybe it's a tree someone else will sit under one day, not knowing your story, but still feeling your shade. And that's enough. If this story reminded you of your own journey, of the things you've built in silence, of the rooms you had to leave to finally hear your own voice, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What does legacy mean to you? Not the kind they hand you, but the kind you grow quietly, deeply, and on your own terms. If this resonated, please share it with someone who might need that reminder today. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories about strength that doesn't shout, but still echoes. Your voice matters, and the world's finally listening.